Imagine standing in a modern police station, watching as an officer gently presses a suspect's fingers onto a sleek scanner. The ridges of the fingertips appear instantly on the screen, unique, detailed, and unrepeatable. It feels like a marvel of modern science, something born from the age of technology and forensics. Yet, astonishingly, this idea that our fingertips hold unique patterns that can identify us is thousands of years old. The story of fingerprinting begins not in the laboratories of the 19th century, but in the ancient world, in a time when ink, clay, and intuition first revealed one of humanity's most personal signatures. Our fingerprints, those delicate ridges and whorls that seem so ordinary, are actually a biological masterpiece. They form before we are even born, around the 6th month of fetal development, and remain unchanged throughout our lives, even after injuries or burns heal. Every fingerprint is a lifelong ID card written in skin, one that no two humans share, not even identical twins. But the discovery that these natural patterns could be used for identification was a realization that took humanity millennia to appreciate. The earliest known use of fingerprints for identification can be traced back to ancient China, nearly 2,000 years ago, long before forensics had a name. During the Qin dynasty and later the Han dynasty, officials and merchants used fingerprints as a means of validating documents and sealing contracts. Archaeologists have uncovered clay seals and official documents where thumbprints were pressed into wax or ink beside signatures, signifying authenticity. To the ancient Chinese, a fingerprint was sante, just a smudge. It was a promise, a personal mark of trust that could not be duplicated. Even in the early centuries of human civilization, people seemed to sense that something about those swirling lines was profoundly individual. In fact, Chinese legal writings from around the 3rd century BCE contain records of using handprints and fingerprints in criminal cases, an early form of forensic reasoning that would take the rest of the world nearly 2 millennia to rediscover. Meanwhile, across the world, in ancient Babylon, merchants pressed their fingerprints into clay tablets to sign business transactions. These imprints weren't analyzed scientifically, not yet, but they were recognized as personal identifiers. The Babylonians might not have known why each print was unique, but they knew enough to rely on them in matters of trust, trade, and law. In Japan, around the 8th century CE, officials also used fingerprints as seals on contracts, known as daga. Similarly, in India, fingerprints were sometimes used for identification in both commerce and crime, particularly by local authorities who noticed that no two prints were ever the same. The concept of individuality in fingerprints was alive and well across ancient Asia. It simply hadn't been systematized yet. The Western world, however, remained largely unaware of this ancient wisdom. For centuries, Europe relied on written signatures, wax, seals, and physical descriptions for identification systems, prone to forgery and error. It was until the 17th century that Western scientists began to study the structure of fingerprints with curiosity rather than mere observation. One of the earliest to document their uniqueness was Nehemiah Grew, an English physician who, in 1684, described the fine ridges and patterns on human hands and feet in great detail. A few decades later, Marcello Malpighi, an Italian anatomist, examined fingerprints under a microscope and identified the loops and whorls we now recognize in modern forensic classification. Yet, despite their groundbreaking work, neither Grew nor Malpighi suggested fingerprints could be used for identification. They saw them as fascinating anatomical curiosities. Nothing more. Nothing more. That connection between fingerprints and identity would not be made in Europe until the 19th century. And even then it came through a series of remarkable coincidences and cross-cultural rediscoveries. In 1858, a British colonial officer in India named Sir William Herschel stumbled upon the concept by accident. While overseeing local contracts, Herschel required people to sign agreements. One day, on a whim, he asked a local man, Rajiadhar Konai, to press his handprint on a contract as a personal seal, partly to prevent fraud, partly out of curiosity. Over time, Herschel noticed that no two prints ever looked alike, and that a person's prints never changed, even after years. Fascinated, he began collecting handprints and fingerprints systematically, using them as proof of identity in official documents. What Herschel had rediscovered was something ancient cultures already knew, that fingerprints were nature's most reliable signature. But Herschel went further. He realized they could be used as a scientific tool. He began to propose the idea that fingerprinting could replace unreliable identification methods in colonial administration. Around the same time, another British scientist, Dr. Henry Folds, working as a missionary and doctor in Japan, was making similar observations. In the 1870s, Folds examined ancient pottery and noticed fingerprints baked into the clay. He deduced that if prints could last for thousands of years on artifacts, perhaps they could also serve as permanent identifiers for living people. Folds even conducted experiments, lifting fingerprints from glass surfaces using powders, an early version of what modern forensic investigators do today. In 1880, Folds published his ideas in the journal Nature, suggesting that fingerprints could be used in criminal investigations. He even wrote to Charles Darwin for advice on how to promote his findings. But Darwin, aging and occupied with other work, passed a letter to his cousin, Sir Francis Galton. It was Galton, a statistician and polymath, who would transform fingerprinting from an observation into a full-fledged science. In 1892, Galton published Fingerprints, a groundbreaking book that established the first systematic study of fingerprint individuality. He analyzed thousands of samples, calculated the probability of two fingerprints being identical, which he estimated as 1 in 64 billion, and classified patterns into categories: loops, whorls, and arches. His work gave fingerprinting the scientific foundation it needed to become a trusted method of identification. Soon after, the police world took notice. The first criminal conviction based on fingerprint evidence occurred in 1892 in Argentina. Inspector Juan Bucetich, building on Galton's research, developed his own classification system and used it to solve the murder of 2 children. The mother, Francisca Rojas, had tried to frame another man, but her bloody fingerprint on the doorframe exposed her guilt. It was the moment fingerprinting stepped from theory into law enforcement history. By the early 20th century, fingerprinting had spread rapidly across the globe. Police departments in Europe, India, and the United States began collecting and cataloging prints. In 1901, Scotland Yard established its first fingerprint bureau under Sir Edward Henry, who refined Galton's system into a practical method for large-scale classification. The Henry system, as it came to be known, became the global standard for decades. From then on, fingerprints became synonymous with justice, no longer just a mark of authenticity on clay tablets. They were the ultimate proof of identity in criminal cases. They appeared in courtrooms, on passports, and in employment files. Fingerprints became both a tool of truth and a symbol of the modern age, where individuality could be measured and verified with scientific precision. But as technology advanced, fingerprinting didn't stop evolving. In the mid-20th century, the process shifted from ink and paper to digital scanning. Automated systems emerged, leading to the creation of massive databases, like the FBI's Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, IF, launched in 1999. Today, billions of prints are stored and compared in seconds through algorithms that can match a smudge on glass to a digital file with near-perfect accuracy. And yet, for all this modern sophistication, it is humbling to remember where it all began in the ink-stained fingers of ancient Chinese merchants, in the clay seals of Babylonian traders, in the curiosity of early scientists. What began as a simple imprint in clay became a global system of trust. The same human impulse, to verify, to authenticate, to know who we were dealing with, has guided this journey for thousands of years. The modern scanner at a border checkpoint or the biometric lock on your phone is, in essence, an echo of a thumb pressed into wet clay under the light of an ancient lamp. The surprising origin of fingerprinting reminds us that human ingenuity often lies not in invention, but in rediscovery. What we call modern is often ancient wisdom. Our fingertips, those small, swirling ridges, carry not just our identity, but a story that spans empires, sciences, and centuries. So the next time you unlock your phone or pass through security with a fingerprint scan, remember, you're taking part in a ritual that began over 2,000 years ago. A ritual of trust, identity, and the eternal human desire to leave a mark that no one else can replicate.